Hey guys, and welcome back to Trying to with Leah, where the injuries just never really seem to stop. This week alone, I have stubbed my big toe twice. I walked into yet another door handle and I dropped a 40-pound weight on my fingertips. And somehow I walked out of the week with less bruises than I had last week. So I think we're making some kind of progress, but I don't know. So if you're new here, welcome to the chaos. I am Leah. And on my channel, I like to talk about personal growth and perspective shifts and learning from life's lessons as well as your own insecurities and just trying to become a better person on a daily basis. So if that is something that you're interested in, I hope that you like and subscribe and that you follow along for the journey. Before we get into today's topic, I want to say a quick thank you to my friends and my family. You guys have been with me through every chapter of my life, and you have watched me as I've worked to overcome these things. And opening up about them, especially on the internet, is a new and unusual experience. But I do fully believe that if I can help somebody with my perspective and with my story and with my experience, then if I can help them get through what they're going through right now, then it is definitely worth every uncomfortable conversation. So thank you guys for being accepting of me opening up about these things and accepting of me in general and what I'm trying to do. I love you guys. So today I wanted to talk about balance, and that is not physical balance because we all know that I struggle with that one. But I'm talking about more of an inner balance and how to maintain an inner balance. Ironically, I've actually had a reminder of balance on my body since the day I was born. I have two birthmarks that are actually made up of clusters of freckles, and one is on my arm right here, and hopefully you can see that, but it reminds me of a little ice cream cone with a cherry on top. And I always thought that that was a really cute comparison, kind of like it's a little good omen or something like that. But then we have the one on the back of my leg, and that one looks like I sat on that ice cream cone. So, yeah, cool. But I think that's kind of fitting in a way because I feel like life really works that way too. You know, for every high, there is a low. For every success, there is a failure. And for every moment of confidence, usually there's a moment full of doubt. So for every ice cream cone, there is a smeared backside. But in this life, we experience incredible joy and heartbreaking pain, and we celebrate and we grieve, and life takes us through the full spectrum of emotions, whether or not we like to go through it. So, to me, that's kind of proof that balance is literally built into the human experience. And I think that the challenge is not trying to create a life for yourself that doesn't have ups and downs, because how boring would that be? But it's about learning how to maintain a balance and stay grounded and centered while you experience all of these extreme emotions. And one of the most common ways that I see this in my own life is trying to find the balance between my head and my heart. Sometimes we can spend way too much time in our head and we're overthinking and overanalyzing and going over every possibility and every mistake. And we can literally trap ourselves in our thoughts that way. And then other times we're overtaken by emotion and we react before we think, and then we lash out and we assume the worst in other people. And we let these temporary feelings convince us that they're permanent. But neither of those extremes is really beneficial for us. And I think that, to me, finding balance is finding that middle ground where you can actually say, okay, logically, here's what happened and here's what I have control over. And also emotionally, yes, that hurt me and it affected me in these ways, but I have the power to decide how it affects me from here. I don't think that you have to pretend that something didn't affect you, but you also don't have to let it define you. You know, one of the best lessons that I've ever learned is that somebody else's actions do not have to determine how I see myself. And that's even if that somebody else is an old version of me. And I think somewhere in between our head and our heart is where our intuition comes in. And when we try to lean on other people's opinions to determine what's best for ourselves, it makes our intuition really hard to hear. Parents and partners and friends and other people can convince us that they know better for us than we do. And they might on some things, but if you honestly believe that everybody else knows what's best for you and that you don't, that can create a problem because you're the one that's living your life. And don't get me wrong, it is good to listen to advice if it's healthy advice. And it's good to be open to correction and constructive criticism if it's healthy. But eventually, sometimes you decide that you're the one that knows best for you over what other people do. And that doesn't mean that you're always going to make the right decision for yourself. And it also doesn't mean that you need to stop listening to other people completely, but it's about getting to a point where you trust yourself enough to take everything into account and then make an informed decision for yourself. And I think that was a huge turning point for me because I realized my intuition was having a hard time speaking up because everybody else's voices were louder. The need for balance also shows up in our habits and especially our overindulgences. For me, there was a period of time where I felt as though I had earned a glass of wine every night after work. And sometimes I had earned two or three. And I literally had every justification ready. I told myself I work hard and it helps me relax and it helps me sleep. And for too long, that story made so much sense until finally it didn't. I was tired of feeling sluggish in the morning and gross and having stomach issues and having some nights where I overdrank. And, the effects of drinking it was making it feel like it wasn't worth it anymore. And that was the point that I was finally able to make a change. But I knew that trying to become a completely different person overnight is a big stretch. So I started just doing it much smaller. I started creating little boundaries for myself and little rules and filling that glass a little bit less full than usual and starting a little later in the evening and taking smaller sips even just to make it last longer, whatever you have to do to trick your brain, And at first it is really uncomfortable to sit in that addictive mindset and to have to overcome that overwhelming feeling of needing another drink, and it was the same with cigarettes. But every time I did that and I sat through those waves of addiction, I realized that I was stronger than that addiction. I was stronger than those waves and that addictive mindset. And if that's the case, then I can break free from it. So all of these little tiny decisions kept adding up until eventually I reached my first 100% alcohol-free day in a long time. And I built that day up to be really, really challenging in my head. And it was pretty challenging, but at the same time, it was more so just empowering because I didn't feel like I was powerless anymore against that addiction. I felt like I had the power. I think it was more really about proving to myself that I could choose differently regardless of that craving. And I'm stronger than those bad feelings. And I think that lesson really applies to almost anything, overeating and doom scrolling and gambling and any kind of addiction, even having difficult conversations. There's so many things in life that try and pull us out of balance. But I think that balance is restored by positive choices and by having belief in yourself. You make one positive choice and it leads to another and another. And eventually all of those little choices become your new normal and your new baseline. And I think that is what keeps you balanced, is this dedication to loving yourself and building better for yourself. One thing that's helped me probably almost more than anything is having a way to return to center when I notice I'm overwhelmed. And ironically, I think that the best way for me to explain that is to tell you how I found it, which is trying to stretch out my back. I had mild scoliosis when I was young, and that means that my spine is kind of curved differently. So it can cause some back pain. And one of the biggest ways that they taught me how to deal with that is to do certain stretches that help stretch those areas out. So one of the things that I do for that is I'll just sit cross-legged on the floor and I kind of try to align my spine. I start at my hips, just kind of adjusting them until they feel centered, and then I'll move up to my lower back and center that, and then my mid back and my upper back and shoulders, neck, head, just kind of stacking everything into alignment. And when I do that, something about it just kind of feels right, like I've found my spine's home base, kind of a thing. I don't know. But yeah, so I do that pretty much every day. But over time, I think that concept works emotionally as well. Whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed or anxious or consumed by whatever's happening, I just give myself a minute and I stop and I take a breath and give myself a moment to say, okay, am I too far in my head? Am I too far in my heart? Have I stopped listening to my intuition? And just asking those questions usually is what helps you find your way back. If I've been thinking about it for too long, I'm probably too far in my head. And if I have this irrational urgency or this anxiety around it, I'm probably too far in my heart. And if I take all of that overthinking and all of that emotion away, what is my gut trying to tell me? I think life is going to knock us off our center over and over again, like Chumbawamba. That's just what it does. But finding balance is about learning how to find your way back to center, regardless of what happens, to remind yourself that you're still in control of your choices. You still have the power, you're still capable, and most importantly, you're still growing and becoming the person that you're trying to be. So never forget to give yourself grace along the way. So for this week's challenge, I want you guys to take an honest look at your own life once again and ask yourself, where am I out of balance? Am I living too much in my head or maybe in my emotions? Am I relying too heavily on comforts and vices and other people's opinions? And am I overindulging or letting addictions get a hold of me? Am I ignoring my intuition? Or maybe I'm just neglecting myself in certain areas while I focus on other areas. But whatever it is, just take a step back and toward your center, because that's all that balance really is. It's learning how to return to yourself whenever life tries to knock you off course. So if this video hit home for you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you have found something that's helped you find balance in your own life, or if you've been able to overcome an addiction, please share your tips and tricks and helpful hints in the comments, because you really don't know who could use it. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow along. Keep trying, guys, because I promise you, life does get better when you try. I'll see you guys next week.